Hello, my friends. I know it's been a while. I had to kind of unplug for a few days, as you can imagine. Being exposed to all of this news, sometimes it just gets to be too much, and I need to kind of break away and unplug a bit. But excited to have a guest today. As an introduction, let me just first say welcome to Christy Lee Independent Media. That's KLIM.news. And for the background on this, some of you may remember an interview I did with Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller. He is the one that came out after the Afghanistan withdrawal, particularly after a bombing happened in Kabul and took the lives of many servicemen, and expressed his frustration and disappointment in the leadership and how this happened. And it was a whirlwind after that, posting this to social media. It was in violation of the code of conduct, and he paid the price. He lost his 17-year career in the Marines. His wife, things just changed dramatically for him, but he was brave enough to speak to what other people were feeling. And he's continuing to speak out and begrudgingly getting involved in politics. So my guest today is Lieutenant Gunner William Callen, and he's a battalion gunner, and he wanted to share what he observed with this Afghan withdrawal, particularly on an airfield. And so I'm just going to go ahead and bring him in and allow him to explain. Let me do this. Okay, so Gunner, welcome for coming, and thank you for coming in. And you are able to break your silence and kind of you don't want to say expose, what you saw, but more celebrate the bravery that you saw on the day that things were really going down. And first, do you want to explain why you're able to talk about this now?
Yeah, Chrissy, first, thanks for having me on the show. I have retired and my service has ended, so I'm kind of the first one that is able to get out. I can speak about this now. I can speak about it freely. I'm not under the Uniform Code of Military Justice anymore, to the point that I was while I was on active duty. So I can talk freely. I don't really want to get into the politics and everything on this show. I've seen so many articles. I've read so many things about people talking about what happened at the Kabul airport, and they weren't there. If you weren't there, you don't know what the story was. And so the heroic nature of the service these young men and women that displayed on the airfield, that has not gotten out yet. So that's really why I approached you about coming on the show.
And before we get too deep into that, I mean, that's the unfortunate thing about this whole thing is there's always a lot of speculating that goes on. And not only that, but what happened there just got glossed over because we're in this news cycle where it's just one thing after the other. It's a current thing and another current thing. And so these very important subjects and things that happen don't really get delved into or dug into or examined because we're already on to the next thing. So before we dig into that, let's go a little bit over your background. So you joined the military, particularly the Marines, in 1999?
Yes, joined right out of high school in 1999. I graduated on a Wednesday night, and Sunday morning I was in Paris Island.
And kind of take me through your growth in the Marines and how you rose through the ranks and your perceptions as they changed through those changes.
Well, right after boot camp, I came in and I volunteered for the infantry. I never wanted to be anything else. So go through boot camp, you go through the School of Infantry, and then I was assigned to First Battalion 6th Marines for my first 4 years. So I was in 1-6 all the way up through until late February of 2003 when I was switched battalions to do the invasion of Iraq. So served throughout the entire invasion of Iraq in 2003. I actually got out of the Marine Corps for about a year and 9 months. At the end of my first contract. So I served as a corrections officer in Indiana while I was out. Came back in 2005. Went out to First Battalion 4th Marines. Was assigned there, and a couple more deployments. I went on ship for a while. Another deployment to Iraq. Come back from that, and then I was made to leave the fleet. The whole thing about mental casualties started coming around. And so I had too many deployments too quick, and they said that I was going to leave the fleet. So I was directed to leave the fleet, and I was assigned to Quantico, Virginia at the Martial Arts Center for the Marine Corps. Did that until 2011. Then I left there and went out to 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines. A couple more deployments. Come back, reassigned to Quantico again. I was in Quantico as staff until 2018 when I was selected to be an infantry weapons officer, which is a Marine gunner. So when I was selected to be a Marine gunner, went through schooling in Quantico, and then I was assigned to First Battalion Eighth Marines. And I checked in there 1 October of 18 and served there until I retired on the 25th of March this year.
Okay. And you were highly decorated, most recently a Bronze Star Medal and a Hubert Trophy for outstanding leadership. So congratulations on that. And thank you for your service. I want to ask you first about Stuart Scheller. So there was a lot of criticism on both sides of the political aisle now. I know you said that you don't want to get into politics, and I think that's great because I don't think that this needs to be political. There was criticism of the withdrawal on both sides and for different reasons. And even when Stuart Scheller came out, he wasn't making it political or trying to make it political. He was just expressing frustration. Were you shocked or surprised when you saw this circulating and it then go viral?
Well, Stu and I have a history going back, I think about 10 years. Surprised a little bit going viral, no. When someone from, inside the club breaks the silence and starts, airing out dirty laundry, some people take it, as, he's a hero. Other guys don't take it so bad. I know Stu, I kind of see why he did that. I don't agree with everything that he says. And I won't really get into the parts that I agree with, right? So that's not why we're kind of on here. It's a great system that's perpetrated by, imperfect people at times. That's about the best we can say. No one's perfect every day, but a lot of great people do a lot of great things every day. So, I mean, it's like that everywhere.
Right. So your frustration has been more of how certain things were depicted. You said that there were some outright lies about what happened on the airfield. Can you explain, set that up so we really understand what time you're talking about, where it happened, and the misrepresentations?
Well, so I think the entire operation was misrepresented from the beginning. At the start, I arrived in Kabul around mid-July of 21. So I was a part of an early entry team that went in under a brigadier general's staff. I was just in addition to it. I was out on deployment at the time. We had been deployed for about 5 or 6 months when we went into Kabul. So the job that I have as a special advisor or commanding officer, I'm always forward. So I go in, and I really went into Kabul to help out, to be eyes on the ground and plan the battalion's defense of the airfield in itself. So underneath the MU, there's a logistics battalion that really was tasked with doing all the processing of the evacuees to get them on planes and getting the planes out. So we secured the airfield, and that's what the infantry battalion was doing on the MU. So it was the first time I've ever been in combat with a cell phone, right? So I had a government cell phone with me the whole time. I have multiple trips in and out of the Middle East, and everything that I had was always a satellite phone. So I really didn't know what was going on back in the States, why everything was going on. Well, this time, I was kind of getting updates from what was being said, really from my wife. I would check in with her, kind of every day, let her know that I was all right or what was going on as much as I could tell her. So as the situation kept progressing and the differences in story that would hit the media, it was all wrong. But I don't know how anything got out anyway, because we were told at the start that the media wasn't allowed in Kabul. The entire 17-day operation, the only media that I saw, I think, was Al Jazeera, and the Taliban brought them in. So when we left Kabul and we got back to Kuwait before we came back to the States and redeployed, we started to see this whole operation getting, happy talked away with the Armed Forces Network commercials that would come on, the AFN. Those commercials would talk about these Afghans coming off these C-17s at airfields, and everybody was happy and everybody was nice. And, they would get their little bag of juice and food and they would go in a nice orderly manner. Well, that's not the way Kabul was. So it has really not gotten out the amount of combat that was on that airfield for the entire operation. It hasn't gotten out that the firefights that we had with the Taliban prior to us, literally the day prior to us getting told that now we're friends with the Taliban and we're going to partner with them. Yep. That was an order that we stood post with the Taliban on our gates. You want to talk about frustrating? You try fighting people for 20 years of your career, and then the last operation, you fight with them one day, and then the next day you're told you're standing post with them.
I can't imagine that. To back up just a little bit, obviously anything that involves media and the narratives that they're pushing out perks my ears up, having been a member of the media for so long. And I mean, that had to be crazy to on the one hand here, media is not allowed in there, but then you're seeing certain narratives being pushed out. Do you have any idea or any speculation of who is putting out certain narratives or who is putting out these messages to be aired?
Well, I think a lot of the viral stuff on Twitter and Instagram came from the Afghan crowds themselves. I think kind of what you're seeing in Ukraine is an entire war documented through social media. I think really that Kabul in last summer was the genesis of that. So I would show up at a gate and I would have a guy tell me like, hey, I'm viral, right? I got a baby over the wire and it was filmed and now it's going viral all over Twitter. I don't have Twitter. I'm not on that. And it kind of shocked me a little bit, but then photos started going around. There's another photo of a sergeant that we had holding a baby that had just gotten through the gate. Family never did, but a baby did. And that happened hundreds of times that I know about offhand. And so when the babies come through, how many orphans are coming through. So we just had this sergeant sitting there consoling a baby and someone took a picture of it and it got put out on social media and it went viral apparently. So I think that's a lot where it came from. There's a lot of Instagram posts that were not true. And some were just, misinformation, not, the misinformation that we talk about now. Some were just kind of wrong. And so someone got an idea of information and was just, not accurate. My wife just kind of reminded me the other day about some of those titles of those Instagram posts, so, and then people didn't know that. I think there was only one headline that said we were in, a firefight with the Taliban on the airfield. Well, that happened, I think, about on the second or third day of fighting that airfield. So there's these little things that were going around the entire thing. But, even when we got back to Camp Lejeune after the deployment ended, nobody even knew that we were in combat in Kabul. They just thought we went in and got out a bunch of orderly, civilians and put them on C-17s and they flew out. And that was absolutely not the case. We spend however much money a year on defense, and you could arguably the close of the global war on terror, we fist fought the entire time.
Insane. There's so much to dig into here, but you're talking about two different things. So I'm asking, you were seeing some certain things being put out from, at least that's how I'm understanding it, from mainstream news. But then on the other hand, there were certain things being put out just through Twitter, TikTok, social media. Did both avenues just get it completely wrong? Was one more right than the other? What was your impression in terms of that?
I didn't see a lot of the social media stuff. This is just what I'm piecing together, as I talk to guys after we came off. And, some of the guys still have some of the Instagram like stories or posts where they say where, people in the crowds outside of our gates were putting out on Twitter and putting Instagram posts out. Some of the things that I've seen in the mainstream media, there was an article written that was, completely wrong. And this article was written by the other Marine battalion, like people from the other Marine battalion that was in Kabul. And that other battalion was attached, a small portion of their battalion, right? There's about 3 line companies, 3 rifle companies that were attached under my MU. And we all had our gates that we had to cover down. But inside that article, they stated that Abbey Gate was not the most dangerous place in Kabul, or it was the most dangerous place in Kabul. And it absolutely wasn't. If you want to talk about the most dangerous place on the air fort, it changed by the hour. Our tactics changed by the hour according to the threat of the crowds that we had. So if you go all the way back into the timeline, and I can't really remember the dates because, we would fight 2 or 3 days and you'd sleep for 3 or 4 hours and you get up and fight for another 2 or 3 days. And that was the tempo during the entire operation for everybody that was standing the gates and fighting the airfield and that was actually securing it to keep the runway open.
Do you feel like domestic, like mainstream news, was trying to kind of paint this? Well, I mean, I guess we can only speculate their motivations, but they were basically giving the impression that this was much more peaceful, much more seamless of a operation than what you were experiencing on the ground.
Well, I think it comes to the political affiliation of the news system, right? So if it was a Democrat channel, then they tried to say it was going great. And if it was like Fox News, they tried to say that it was a disaster of withdrawal. To this day, you'll still hear some people talk about the disaster of the withdrawal. Well, maybe at certain levels, you might consider it that. That's way above the level that I was at. I know with the people that I was with in First Battalion Eighth Marines, from the top to the bottom, the battalion commander to our lowest private, there has not been a situation or not been a scenario in the 20 years that I've been in and out of combat that the old adage of uncommon valor was a common virtue fits more than the operation in Kabul with the evacuation. So our young people went in, our battalion was heavily trained. We went through a year and a half of workups, right? We had an amazing commander, an amazing command staff, amazing support all around these young men and women that were the actual fighters on the line. Then our senior staff was a great mix of personalities that any of us could always go to our commander. We were his inner circle and we could give him our advice and he would chew on it and then he would make a decision. No ifs, ands, or buts. He was in charge and he was the man that we were working for. When we got on the ground, we were always on the front line. Myself, my commander, we were right there with the guys, with the privates, with the lance corporals. We had the other senior staff that were in the jock that were controlling things while my battalion commander commanded on the ground. Our senior enlisted was right there with the young guys, with the young girls, eating dirt with them, throwing blows with them, and getting hit, right? So we had gunfights, we had fist fights, right? The Afghans were fighting us, we were fighting them. So one night, if I remember, one night right after the evacuation started, it was about midnight. We were walking into the operations center and we got told that one of our C-17s is getting swarmed. We look on the drone feed and all we see is crowds around a C-17. And we had just dropped our gear. We immediately picked it up. No word said, no plan formed. We just went because we had to get out there because they were going to crash one of our planes. We hit that airfield with everybody we had in the battalion. We had a little less than 200 fighters on the ground at that time. We had an entire line company. We had elements of another line companies. It was really our advanced party that came in. The senior staff had to do what they had to do inside the operations center. The commander, me, the sergeant major, our main effort as far as the companies go, and everybody that was on the ground from 1-8, we hit the airfield. They didn't know what they were going into. From the drone footage, it looked like a prison riot, not a military operation. So we hit shoulder to shoulder. A little under 200 fighters had to fight about 5,000 to 7,000 Afghans back across the entire airfield to the south throughout the night. We fought them back. We pushed them back. And about an hour before sunrise, we actually had them reach the southern side of the airfield, which was the old civilian side of the airport. We did not realize that the Afghan government had fell and everybody had abandoned their posts. So they hit the civilian side of the airport. We didn't have a plan of what we were going to do once we got them over there, but we knew we had to get them away from our planes.
Tell me what the motivation of was for these thousands of Afghans. Were they trying to escape? What was going on there?
Their motivation was get on a plane.
Get on a plane because they wanted to get out.
They wanted to get out.
Gotcha.
Now, what we didn't know, but we found out later, just before sunrise, is the Taliban has set up a checkpoint on the southern side of the airfield, just outside the civilian side of the airport. So if we pushed them out, they were going to hit a Taliban checkpoint that they were not allowed to get through. So there was actually, once we got them over, there were gates on either side of the airfield. We tried to open a gate and create a tunnel to funnel the crowd out. And this crowd at the time was about 5,000 to 7,000. And about every 10 hours for the next 3 days, the crowd size would double. So we tried to funnel them out to get them off the airfield so that we could secure it without them happening. As soon as they saw they were, they darted back in.
Civilians like myself understand this, because it seems like it would be very difficult fighting and pushing back and things like that. People that were desperate to get away from who you understood to be who you were really fighting, the Taliban, and be the enemies. I mean, gosh, I just can't imagine the emotional conflict with all of that happening. What was that like?
So the emotions didn't run rampant at that point, right? So we had a mission, keep the runway open. Gotcha. At that point, the runway was not open. So we went out, we spent all night pushing this crowd back over. Yes, there were some families in there, but there was a lot of single men in there, military-age men, like Afghan national soldiers, like Afghan army soldiers trying to get out of the country.
Right.
So we had to push them back. I believe with that Taliban checkpoint to the south, I believe that the Taliban went around that night and actually drove them to the airport. I think the Taliban was trying to get us to kill a bunch of civilians so then they could be the heroes. And we never did.
Wow. So crazy.
Now, that's just what I think.
Yeah.
That's not the view of anybody in the military, the Marine Corps. That's my opinion after a year of reflection, or almost a year of reflection on this operation.
Now, obviously,
the Taliban ended up using people as a weapon.
Yikes. Now, obviously, as we're seeing and trying to make sense of this here at home, you know, you see some people getting on planes, you see pictures, you know, and then you have to basically trust you're being told the truth. Who was getting put on planes? How were they vetted? What was the process there?
So the ones that were getting put on planes early were the SIVs that you heard about. They were the ones that Department of State sent them messages, all those things. They were actually supposed to come through the civilian side of the airport, right? So that was a pretty intricate operation itself. That was the first few planes that went out. You know, when we hit the airfield that night, it was about midnight. There was a few planes that went out that day, and myself, my commander, my senior enlisted were with a platoon down on the, you know, the Abbey gate, and we started getting shot at by a Dishka machine gun. I know it's a Dishka because I found a bullet on the ground, a full bullet. So they were really shooting at the planes. We just happened to be in line of in the gun target line of the Dishka where it was shooting. So and there was a guy on the gate. What's that?
Who was shooting?
It was either going to be the Taliban or it was going to be ISIS. Someone was trying to stop that plane from taking off.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we hadn't been told we were friends with the Taliban yet, so it was probably them. But I couldn't say exactly who because we could not leave the airfield to go exploit these scenes and actually find who was shooting at us. This is fixed site security. We were completely defensive. So as we were getting shot at on this gate, there was actually one civilian contractor that got shot, you know, through the hand by the machine gun. So we were taking casualties right off the bat, you know, as far as American goes. And so we fought that gate all day. And then we, you know, went around that night and then started fighting that night. So when the airfield was flooded, we went out and started pushing them back across. Now we fought that airfield for 2 nights, 2 days. Into the third night, right? That's when the airfield was quelled because a unit of Afghan special forces came down from Lashkar Gah to reinforce us.
Wow. And so there was a point at which you were told that you suddenly had to welcome your enemies as your friends with the Taliban. Tell me how that went down.
So the first day the sun came up, there was an army unit out to the south of the airport that were kind of holding off the crowds. They got retasked later in the morning. So when they came through, the entire flood of people hit the civilian side of the airport, and they started coming over the gates. Well, the Taliban started coming through the airport as we were getting shot at. So we were holding a line. We were on a human line, holding these crowds back from swarming our planes again. And so on this line, we're getting shot at from the airport. All through the airport, there was glass looking all around us. So bullets start landing, bullets starts cracking. Our guys can't get down. They can't move. They can't see cover because if they do that, now the crowd escapes. So they just stand there and take it.
Wow.
Now, no one got hit at that moment. But then the gun started getting lower in the airport and they started getting closer. So then one, Taliban fighter, he appeared from a door of the civilian terminal. He was on like a loading dock that was higher than the crowd. And when he was firing his, AK in the air, and once that AK started to get leveled, one of our Marines, shot him. And then I shot a second guy. And then at that point, 2 squads that were right in front of us, my battalion commander is right next to me. 2 squads right in front of us, they then engaged the other, I think there were 3 or 5 more Taliban fighters inside of that loading dock. They engaged for a few seconds. They did exactly what they were trained to do. Then they shut down the fire. They ceased it. And at that point, we had several dead Taliban and no civilians were injured. They shot through the crowds before the crowds were able to get down. They acted absolutely perfectly. All those young fighters did. And that was just one day. Now, the next day, when the airfield gets quelled, going into the next night, well, now we get told that we're standing post with the Taliban. So the people that we were just shooting at and shooting at us, now we're going to stand post with. I don't know where that order came from.
To that, and was there anyone that was protesting to that, or that just doesn't happen in the Marines?
At that point, the situation, and it wasn't just the Marine Corps. You have to remember that this was a Marine Corps unit that was there to do the evacuation, right? So you had elements of the 82nd Airborne that were in there. I don't know how many of them landed on the airfield, but there were a bunch of them because I saw them all like sitting in the shade. So there was a lot of different elements there. Not a lot of coordination from what I saw between the different elements.
Gotcha.
So it was kind of rough when that happened. That order started going around the jock, and in a combat situation, if you start questioning orders, everything breaks down.
Yeah.
We received the order. I can't tell you where the genesis of the order was. I know it came down through our chain of command, and we had to follow it. So at that point, now Taliban are walking shoulder to shoulder with our guys standing these gates. But
that's so crazy. It's just
going into like another day. The southern part of the airfield had been secured. Those fighters from the Afghan Special Forces had secured to the south, and that wasn't a concern anymore. That's when we were able to stabilize our 3 gates, right? So the North Gate, the East Gate, and the Abbey Gate. All of them going down to the airport, and that's when we can start trying to evacuate people. Now, once those gates were solidified, you started having crowds of people outside of all 3 of those gates that stretched for miles. Mm-hmm. Shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath, miles of people all trying to get through this little gate. So we had to figure out how to get them through. The first couple of days, you had Department of State consulates that were there that were verifying paperwork. So very slow. We had to figure out how to secure the gate, how to get 10 or 12 through the gate at a time, then shut the gate and keep the gates from becoming a flood. So our tactics were changing by the hour on how to figure out how to work these gates. Once we saw something worked at one gate, we spread the word to the other gates, to see if it worked there. But each gate ended up having their own tactics. And that's when the Taliban showed up. And all of a sudden, we're shoulder to shoulder with them. And we're having to, there were several instances of just lack of communication, right? So if a woman would fall and a Marine would come and try to help pick her up, well, we can't touch Afghan women. So a Taliban fighter would come in and either point the rifle at a Marine or try to hit the Marine. And our officers and our leadership on those gates intervened immediately and quelled it. So nothing ever came of partnering with them on the gates. The weird part was those of us that grew up fighting these people and fighting this, those of us that came in right around the early 2000s. I came in when it was still peacetime in 99. Some came in, later than that. We've got a bunch of young bucks in First Battalion Eighth Marines that had never been in combat before, right? So a lot of the combat proficiency in all the armed forces has kind of left. Now we're all older. So it's not just our feelings about that order to partner with the Taliban on the gates, but how do we relay this to the young guys that know nothing about seeing news reports their entire childhood about us fighting them? So getting us to sell that order to the young guys on the gates and just telling them, like, listen, just do it. We'll talk about it later. And to keep that peace and to keep the operation going for the next 14 days until the evacuation was called to a stop and we started to get U.S. forces out of Kabul.
Wow. And so I know a lot of people, again, had questions about what the order was of this thing, like of getting people out, who was chosen, how they were vetted, and who was then ultimately left behind. Do you have any insight on any of those major issues that people have had a lot of questions about?
When it was slow, that's when all the paperwork's being verified.
Gotcha.
And your U.S. citizens and your passport holders, they were getting through, and the SIVs were getting through. You get a few days into it, we're not getting the numbers that were expected. And the order was numbers. The order was get numbers. Once the order was get numbers, well, that's when the Department of State consulates stopped checking anything. And if you got through the gate, you went to the terminal and you got on a plane.
Wow. So there were cases that people were just not being vetted at that point because they were trying to get the numbers up.
For days. And it depended on the day. And sometimes it depended on the hour, whether we were getting the numbers that were expected or not. Or now we can check papers, right? So once we started getting numbers out and, we got, I think at one point we were promised somewhere around 35 to 37 planes in one day, and we were ordered to fill them. And then 7 planes showed up. At one point, we had close to 24,000 Afghans inside the airport that started a riot as we were fighting riots outside. So we were fighting riots in front of us.
They were afraid. They were expecting to be able to leave, and then
another thing that has not been talked about is the human disaster this airport was.
I can't imagine. I mean,
the living conditions for everybody were horrible. The living conditions for the evacuees were horrible. The living conditions for the U.S. forces trying to help these people were horrible. So the entire airport was a human disaster. We tried to do the best we could with cleanliness, but, a bunch of people whose world is ending, they're not clean. And so there was trash that piled up. There was clothes that piled up. There's clothes and trash that piled up outside of all of our gates because the amount of people that would sit there for 5, 6, 7 days and not leave. So every part of your human body was happening right there in that crowd. The same thing when they got inside the airport. We tried to help them out as best they could, but nobody was supposed to be inside the airport more than like 24 hours. And some spent 5, 7 days there.
So they're sleeping there. There's, people getting sick there, I imagine. People.
We had excellent medical people with our naval corpsmen and our medical officers that were providing the absolute best medical care they could to everybody on that airfield. I ended up getting COVID on the airfield. So not only were we fighting this entire time hand to hand, but a lot of us ended up getting COVID. At the time, COVID was the big thing. Yeah, we were completely vaccinated, still got COVID. So that started to run amok. But all of our medical people worked tirelessly to heal injuries, to offer medical aid, not just for the heat injuries of people in the crowd, but there was crimes and human travesty happening in those crowds that the Afghans would do to each other. That when those injuries would come through the gates, that our medical people were trying to help them, and they saved a lot of lives. So it ended up, then those injured people, then they got out, and now they have a new life. So that's why I say that the true heroism and the work and just the dedication of the people on that airfield tactically in the tactical scenario of holding these lines and offering medical aid and supporting each other was just unreal. I've never seen it happen before. But there's other people in the airfield that didn't do a damn thing, so it's That's why I just started with like uncommon valor was absolutely a common virtue. We could not award everybody with what they truly deserved.
Because you just had to work within, your instructions and what was going on, to the best of your ability. I want to ask you about, as there was those times where you were asked to, like, we're not getting the numbers, just start filling planes, and you had gotten COVID, and there was major, not only like lockdowns, but the masking and a lot of oppression here at home and in America about the COVID. But here we're just filling planes, and I mean, did you have any thoughts at that time, like, what's going on? Like, where's the consistency here, or
Well,
anything? Or
yeah,
was it
the
just,
the thought was we'll think about that later, right?
yeah,
So, everybody on a gate, everybody that was face to face, hand to hand with those tens of thousands of people. I couldn't even tell you how many people were there. I know when we were fighting the airfield at the very beginning, it seemed like the crowd size doubled every 10 hours. And everybody that was at those gates, their lives were in absolute jeopardy every minute that they were there.
yeah,
Sometimes we were able to get a rotation, where we would send one company to a gate for 12 hours. Another company would try to get some rest for 12 hours, but then that company was also on a react force for that 12 hours, and they were reacting all over the airfield. So they weren't getting rest. They weren't getting the rest we were trying them to get. Sometimes, like we had one company that got tasked with going to a gate for 12 hours. They ended up spending 4 days there before we could get them relief with everything that we had going on in the airfield. Now, that was just 1-8. Several other units, I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't helping us. So we had little food, we had little water, not just because we didn't have the supplies on the airfield, which never got to be a huge issue. The evacuees never went without food or water once they got through the gates. Now, we couldn't give water and food to everybody in the crowd. We just couldn't do that. They would riot over every little thing, and they would absolutely riot over that. But our guys just didn't have time to eat. They didn't have time, to drink water. They would be on a line for however long, then they get exhausted and have to be pulled back, and they had to do other duties such as searchers and escorters and everything else behind the lines, behind the gates. There was just no time for that.
were there times that you or others just felt abandoned?
No, because we had each other. We had each other, and surprisingly enough, a lot of people think that today's military is soft and different than we used to be. Well, higher level policies, whatever people say in the media, go see your daily infantry battalion. I'm not talking about everybody else. I'm talking about your fighters, the people that are on the front lines tonight, the infantry. Our guys had not slept for 2 or 3 days. They had little water, little food. They occasionally had got a cigarette, but every time my boss, my sergeant major, myself showed up at their gate, because we constantly went to everywhere on that airfield for days at a time. Every time we showed up, smiles, high fives, morale. They were just proud to serve in the place that they had seen people serving their entire childhood.
What do you feel like was the breakdown, and where do you think that was? I mean, that could have, allowed this to go smoother. Do you have any speculation on, like, how high up did it go? Because you said
I
there
don't
were
know. I
regulations
don't
and
know how high
issues.
the policy. I know oftentimes that, think about how high vis this was, right? How high vis it was going to be the entire summer, where you would hear whispers about this is going to happen. I think ultimately there's too many hands in the pot. Sometimes the only thing that's worse than not having enough guns in a fight is having too many guns in a fight.
Mm.
So when you have too many hands in the pots and too many people making decisions, too many people giving orders, things get clustered. I don't know if that's what happened. I know that that's what could have happened. It seemed like that to me sometimes in the operations center. to where people didn't know who they were working for. Not anybody in the unit that I was in, as far as the 24th MU. We knew our structure. We knew what we had to do. But you get above our MU, it seemed kind of wishy-washy, and nobody had control of the Army and some of the things that they were doing. I used to ask, what's the 82nd Airborne doing? We don't know. I can tell you exactly what they're doing. I just drove by them. They're in the shade right now. They're in the chow hall line. They weren't standing a gate. But so nobody was coordinating that. I can really thank the 82nd Airborne for their non-lethal munitions, because they weren't using them, so we did. We went through a lot of non-lethal munitions just to try to keep control of these gates.
I've talked to quite a few military members, and that served at different times. It seems to be a consensus that we definitely should have withdrawn, but also seems to be the impression I'm getting that this could have been that it was too rushed. What are your feelings on that?
I think it had 20 years to get out of Afghanistan, right? Like, I don't know how it could be rushed with that time, but from what I hear, I was overseas the entire summer, right? So we deployed in April, and we were overseas the entire time. So all these things about timelines, I would hear whispers. And, when we're deployed, we really don't pay attention to news back here. We get the briefings and stuff that we need to know about. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It painted us into a corner. I know we had heard whispers about it, and there were kind of some rumors going around the entire deployment about the possibility. I know that the way that I got involved with this was I was actually in West Africa I was actually, the night before I boarded a flight to Albania, I got a phone call, said, don't go to Albania. We need you back in Bahrain. All right. And, call the airline and change the tickets and get back to Bahrain and figure out what's going on. And that's where we realized it was a little bit more of a reality. I think, I can't get into the policy things of it. I think, everybody looks at the DOD for this, because ultimately the Department of Defense and the military is what comes in to do these evacuations. But what are the actions leading up to the evacuation? Why was it as such a thing? Why did the Department of State try to hold on so long? We don't know these things. And I definitely don't, being like a lowly gunner in a battalion, right? I'm really important to my battalion, so says, my battalion commander and the guys that are in the battalion, but you get outside of a battalion, I'm nothing. So when it comes to those policies decisions, I don't know. I could speculate at best, but I'm too low level speaking definites.
Do you have any insight on the amount of weapons left behind, or any of that? Or is that also not something that you think you can speak on?
I talked with some of the soldiers, the Army soldiers that closed down Bagram. They said that they spent over a month with a destruction plan in Bagram. We had you could call it rush, but we had a pretty dedicated destruction plan in Kabul before we left. I think when people are talking, again, this is I don't know this for sure, but I believe that when people are talking about equipment left behind, they're talking about when the Afghan soldiers abandoned their post and everything fell with the Afghan National Army, all the stuff that we had given them and sold them for 20 years. I believe that's the weaponry they're talking about. They're not talking about all of our current stuff, right? They're not talking about those things. I don't believe Bagram was left intact for the Taliban to come in and exploit. I don't think that happened. I at least hope not.
Right. Bringing it back to those being able to get on the plane, like when you're filling the numbers. In hindsight, have you had any concern now that you're back home about who was able to make it here, and if they were properly vetted? Did you raise any eyebrows as you were filling up those planes, or was just that not your thought at the time?
No, we were raising some eyebrows when we saw people coming through the gates. The amount of military age males that made it through the gates, single military age males that made it through the gates, that got a free ticket here, it definitely raised some eyebrows. When you get any combat veterans around, you talk about military age males, that's when the eyebrows get raised. Mm-hmm. So towards the end, we started to screen again, and some people were then ushered back out. A lot of military age males were ushered back out to begin, but many, many more made those flights. Some single men would get through the gates and then say, "Oh, my family is 300 meters back in the crowd." And it's great, go get them. We can't go out in the crowd to get them because we start a riot every time we try to do that.
Yeah.
So we're like, great, go get them. And almost to a man, a few went back out in the crowds to get them. Almost to a man, they left their family in the crowd and they went to the airport to get on a plane. So the true amount, I don't think we'll ever know, but I would estimate in the thousands of military age males that made it onto those planes is definitely eye raising.
So is that something that you're concerned about right now?
I live in a small town in North Carolina. I'm not concerned about it until I see it. But I think one of the things that I know that I live with is I spent 20 years fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? So 20 years in and out of combat. I have, 7 tours inside the Middle East total out of 9 deployments. So the thing that you live with is there was several times when you look out over a crowd, and I talked about, the crimes and human travesties inside these crowds. When you would see a military-age male, 18 to 25 years old, grab a young girl, throw her on the ground or throw her on our wire so they could walk across her. Then he gets through the gate. He gets on a plane to come here. She doesn't. That's what raises eyebrows. That's hard.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, I feel like, got to be one of the harder things is thinking about who was left behind. Do you think that there's anything that could have been done differently to get more women and children? And I mean, weren't there Americans also left behind? I mean, can you speak to that?
I can't speak to the Americans left behind because I didn't, when I believe when they talk about Americans, they're talking about the American citizens, the blue passport holders that were actually Afghan citizens. They have dual citizenships.
Okay.
One of the things that you kind of reflect and you look at is the weirdness of the people that we went into Kabul to help became the enemy, and the enemy became our partners. The world got turned upside down.
Yeah.
I've seen worlds end before, such as when we invaded Iraq in 2003, we effectively ended the Iraqi world. We ended the world as they knew it. When we went into Afghanistan in 2001, I believe we ended the Afghan world as they knew it, as those individuals knew it as much as they could throughout the country. I walked into an Afghan village in 2012 and they thought we were Russians. That's how isolated this village was.
Wow.
So I think that human desperation knows no bounds. And I think they saw a way out, and most of them were going to do anything they could to do it. I also think their culture is a lot different than ours. I don't think this is the program to get into the graphic nature of what's accepted in the Afghan culture and not in the American culture. But it's a concern with how many males that made it here. I think ultimately, after almost a year of reflection, I think that we shouldn't have allowed any males to leave the country. It should have just been women and little girls, because they're the ones that were truly at risk.
Yeah.
From the Taliban.
Yeah.
I think that would have cut down on things a lot, and we could have got a lot more out. I think the official number is 124,000 evacuees that we got out of Kabul. I think we could have got out more if it was just women and little girls. If we had just taken them out, and with the men, if the policy was enacted, you want your country, fight for it. We'll protect your women, fight for your country. But that didn't happen. I think that would have produced a better result.
What was the rationale of having to befriend the Taliban, somebody you'd fought with, and suddenly, like you said, just topsy-turvy gets flipped? What was the rationale for that?
I think the rationale, I think I had heard in the operations center, the rationale was like we needed their help with like an outer cordon to like screen the crowd and then let them through. To us, there was no rationale for it. We couldn't believe we actually got ordered to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine.
You know, I remember when we got told that order had come down. I was in the operations center when we got past that, and I just shook my head and I had to go outside and smoke a cigarette. It was baffling to me that we were being ordered to do that. And I've said a lot of hard things to a lot of young people, you know, in the Marine Corps and in the Navy as far as our medical services go. You know, I've got a long history of telling the absolute truth to everybody. And to have to go around with my boss and our senior enlisted in our battalion and to pass this order to these company grade officers, the company senior enlisted, the young men and women inside the platoons, it was crazy. Their faces, and it literally looked like some of them that we stomped on their hearts when we told them that. Mm. But, you know, we just said that, like, we're going to deal with this later. Like, we have to do it now. We'll deal with it later. We don't have time for this.
Yeah. You talk about the concern and reflection of so many military-aged men making it on the planes as opposed to more women and children. What's it like seeing the other avenues of, you know, people flooding in on the Mexico border and, you know, other refugees coming in from Ukraine? Do you have concerns that there's just no borders right now?
Yes. Absolutely. So wasn't it like, I don't know, when Obama was in office, he started talking about how we need to secure the southern border, and now the entire blue side of the aisle is saying open border. I don't know how weird that is, but I think with the southern border especially, we are just allowing criminals, rapists, murderers, drug cartels. I think I saw a news report. There was, I don't know, like 40 Chinese that were caught entering in the southern border. Why are we allowing our next enemy to enter through our country, through our borders? We already brought in almost like an enemy army, you know, from Afghanistan. It has the possibility of being that, right? If not an army, at least, you know, many different, you know, type of terrorist fighters. But we're allowing more through the southern border. I don't understand what this is all about. We have fought to secure this homeland. And I think that if anybody supports the southern border being open, you need to rewind the clock. You need to remember how you felt. Maybe you need to watch a video again of the towers falling on September 11th. Because that's what's going to happen. Our next 9/11 is on the way. And we're allowing the people right now to come in this country to do it. That's what I believe.
Do you feel like you and other people that have put your lives on the line, that have been servicemen, and do you feel like you and others are feeling disrespected as you're watching all of this happen?
No. I think, you know, there's a lot about higher level policy that I don't understand, and I'm never going to understand it. There's a lot about politics that I don't understand, and I'll never understand it.
But it's you fought to like you said, you have all fought to secure our homeland and to protect our freedoms and to keep us safe. And you've been willing to put your life on the line for it. And now you have this political push to open the borders, let anything over, you know, no vetting even there where you were. And little to no vetting. I mean, look, I've been to the southern border myself. Certainly doesn't look like there's any vetting going on there. I can't imagine.
I've seen the reports. I don't think that we feel betrayed as a military. I think we as American citizens feel betrayed.
Gotcha.
So the military is supposed to be apolitical. right? As an active duty military person, you're not supposed to tell anybody who you voted for. You're not supposed to go to political, rallies. You're supposed to be apolitical. That is the goal.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to be, right? So we all have our own beliefs. But at the time we have to follow orders, and this is what's punishable and this is what's not. I believe as American citizens, we feel betrayed.
Yeah.
I believe every American citizen that cares about this country does and should feel betrayed with some of the policies that are going on right now. But you have to remember, even when ISIS was, storming through Iraq and Syria, we had people die in some of the cities that were just being taken by ISIS. So at that point, what did that city mean to us? And that was under an administration that a lot of people that watching your broadcast would feel as friendly. But we gave those cities up to an enemy force. And I had fought in a lot of those cities and had brothers die in some of those cities. But we gave those up too. Same thing in Afghanistan. I was in Kabul in July, watching just the map fall and come north, towards Kabul, watching all the provincial capitals just fail and coming north. I'm like, well, this is going faster than I think a lot of people thought it would. Mm-hmm. But going back to the initial question, as far as your borders go, yeah, we do feel betrayed because now, it's getting harder and harder for the working man to support his family. Why are we supporting all of these extra people too?
Mm-hmm. I mean, and then we just had this tragedy in Uvalde, Texas. I'm based here in Texas, and it goes instantly to, we got to collect all the guns, take them. But these are the same people that are saying, keep the southern border open. It's just like, well, even if we collect all the guns here in the country, but we keep the border open, what do you think's going to happen? The same thing that happens with drugs. They're going to get them in and the wrong people are going to get their hands on them. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, there's a lot of people going around with the absolute right answer to this school problem, as they call it, as far as, I know there's plenty of ex-combat veterans out of there. You put 3 or 4 per school. They're responsible for everything that happens in the school. If someone does happen to get in the school, you have the local sheriff's department and should establish an outer cordon where nobody can get out of the cordon, and those 3 or 4 are responsible for everything in the school. Mm-hmm. I know that there are several combat veterans out there that would love to do nothing more to protect American children every day of their lives until they're too old to walk. I believe that's the absolute right way to do it. More and more coming about the tragedy in Texas and the questionable actions of the law enforcement department there. I hope none of that comes out as true. I hope anybody, military law or law enforcement, that takes an oath to defend the people that they're responsible for absolutely has the courage, the physical and mental courage to live that oath. I know a lot of us do. I know everybody with First Battalion Eighth Marines in the airport in Kabul did. Right. And I hope all of our, brothers in law enforcement and sisters in law enforcement, I hope they do as well. But, the information is what it is at this point. But I think you have to secure the schools. But how I heard one report, it was weird to me about how someone said, how can my 4-year-old, they said they don't feel safe in school because this happened. Well, why does your 4-year-old even know that something like that happened?
Exactly.
In the school? Like, why are you even telling them this stuff? But if they saw friendly combat veteran faces, yeah, we got tattoos. We're going to have, some faded jeans, and we're going to be wearing some plate carriers. But you know what? We'd be friendly to those kids. And we give them high fives on the way in, and they would know they're protected for the entire day. And the school staff would too.
I know as a mother, that sounds amazing. I would feel so much safer with my kids in school, feeling and knowing that it was secure. I don't feel secure with a sign on the door that says, this is a gun-free zone, because that doesn't mean anything to anybody that would have ill intentions other than like, come on in, no one's going to resist you. But I would feel great knowing that there were combat veterans securing and standing guard at the school. That would,
making this a gun issue is just an excuse to try to take away, people's rights, right? So, how many rights have been stolen from us in the past couple of years, and once a right's taken away, it can never get you back. There's I hesitate to say an old adage, but the more that we fall into this stuff, and the bizarre way that we went from AR-15 talk to now we're going to try to confiscate 9mm pistols. The people that talk the most about this have no clue about anything about a gun. Right?
Either that or they have their own security detail.
Well, they're all guarded by guns, right? You want to get rid of guns, get rid of your guarded detail.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Period. Right. Have a bunch of social workers guard you and see how you feel.
How does it feel like also being a member of the military that they expect you to sign up and will ask you to serve and obviously serve with a gun, and now they're saying 18's too young to be, you shouldn't be able to purchase a gun. We'll send you off to war and give you a gun, but you're too young for you to buy a gun here in the country.
I think it's a parental problem, right? Like I grew up in rural Kentucky, and there was a gun in every corner of my father's house. And my brother and I, he's 18 months older, and we knew that we are not to touch them. Mm-hmm. Now I got to be about 10, 11 years old, and I went everywhere with a shotgun and a fishing pole. That's just what I did. But at 10 years old, I knew how to use a gun. I knew what gun safety was. I was taught very early, that way. People, I think we need to get away from sex education in elementary schools, maybe go back to gun safety like it used to be. Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately it comes down to we need more involved parents. Parents need to get off their phones. Parents need to know what's going on in their kids' lives. Parents need to be invested in the kids, right? Contrary to popular belief, a child is a parent's child. Parents' responsibility is, it doesn't take a village. It takes a couple of dedicated parents. You shouldn't go around and confiscate the guns. I remember a country that happened in, back in, the mid to late 30s, and it didn't turn out too well for the citizens of the country, or at least most of them. It's a slippery slope to take freedoms away. I think, armed citizen is a need. Right. And people try to poke holes in the good guy with a gun theory, but, a good guy with a gun can save a lot of people. And there's threats everywhere. That's just a plain fact of life. My kids have been, once they started to be teenagers and going into the adult world, they were told there's threats are everywhere. If you're prepared for them and you can limit the threats, then you can have a very safe and happy life.
Right. Now I know we've spent a lot of time, so I want to be able to wrap this up for you, but couple more questions. Were you afraid to speak out, or have you been anxious to be able to speak out?
Afraid is in what way? Afraid of like repercussions?
Right. Or just resistance, or, I mean,
there is, I don't understand a lot about, the laws we were under while I was active duty. I know there's codes of conduct, and there's like articles of the UCMJ, and there's things I am and not allowed to do. Okay. Well, coming in and, speaking publicly about things is something that I didn't want to do while I was still in active duty. Because of the way things are treated now, and, the hesitant of it. I don't want to come in. I don't want to badmouth people or badmouth any units. I want to tell the exact story of what these young kids did, and, to keep that airfield open to, there were a lot of good people on those planes that deserve a new life, and we have given them a new life, but you got to take the bad with the good sometimes. So there was some of that. I think the biggest hesitation is my wife and I are very private people. We have very private lives, and to open ourselves up like this is a huge step for us. Even, coming in and doing this interview, and I'm only going to do one more. It's one of the things that we sat down and talked a lot about. We were very choosy about who we would do an interview with. We were choosy about what we were going to say in the interviews. And we just don't want to open ourselves up like this. Like, I have I have 3 children, right? It's going to affect them too. So I think that was the major hesitation of just kind of breaking our privacy and kind of putting ourselves out there for the first time.
So why did you what is your main motivation, and what do you want people's main
So
takeaway?
I'm very pro Marine Corps. I'm very pro infantry, and I'm damn sure pro 1-8. The young men and women that served on the airfield, do they deserve every accolade, every award coming to them? Yes. Have they got them yet? No. And the story of valor on that airfield has not gotten out about what these young men and women did. Even when we got back, even some of the infantry battalions in Camp Lejeune in our home station didn't even know what type of combat was on that airfield. They didn't know that these young men and women trained for 2 years to be warfighters, but then they were going to go into combat and fist fight for 17 days because that's what they did. A couple of gunfights here and there. On an average day, it was a bunch of fist fights and fighting a bunch of riots. We didn't train a whole lot for that. But not just the getting the job done and keeping the airfield open, but the way that they did that, I feel very strongly that their story needs to be told.
Yeah. And what other plans do you have? Are you planning on writing a memoir or a book, or what's the next step?
Well, I have a very streamlined education, and I'm not intelligent enough to write that way, but luckily my wife is a writer. And I think she has kicked around the idea of writing a book about this and adding in both perspectives, not only, mine, but hers as well, and how she handled that entire thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's be a story that people would want to read or not, but I think it'd be worth getting out there. We've talked about it for over a year. I know she's dabbled in writing some of the story, and I think has done an outline already. Excuse me, but she kind of keeps that to herself until she's ready to put it out there. But she is most definitely educated enough and qualified enough to write that story, and I think that's the route we may go. But all again, that's opening us up to a whole new world. So we'll see. But for right now, you're what we got.
All right. So that is the main message. You just want people to get more credit for what they experienced out there. And is there an element of you're asking for any accountability on the other end of this, or it's really you just want to keep it more positive about making sure we recognize?
No, I'll leave the accountability things to other people. Like, this is all about the positive nature of what these young men and women did on that airfield.
That not
right.
enough people heard
They
about.
deserve everything coming to them for the job that they did in the horrific conditions that they did it in.
Awesome. Did we cover everything that you wanted to? Is there anything else you wanted to leave us with?
I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover and more. You went straight off the headlines there on me.
Well, I mean,
shots.
we didn't really talk much before this. I do that intentionally because I like to be aware of my audience and like just their basic like curiosities, what they might be thinking. And that's why I try and not talk too much to I interview, so it just can be organic. And I'm hopefully asking the questions that other people are thinking in the moment. So that's kind of why I do it that way. Yeah, I feel like we did cover quite a bit. And keep us knowing what you're going to do next about the book or anything else that we should know. But thank you so much for your service. I mean, this was really eye-opening for me, just especially, being asked to befriend, the Taliban and things like just so many things. And it's great to hear it straight from the source, because there's plenty of us that don't trust the mainstream media anymore. And me having been in it at one point, I can tell you there's good reason not to. I got out after I saw the warning signs. So it's good to hear it straight from the source and your own experience. So thank you again for everything that you went through and for fighting and for standing up for what's right.
Yeah, well, I saved one last thing for you. So
good. Okay.
About the partnering with the Taliban thing, right before the Marines were leaving, because we did solidify the gates. We allowed all the evacuees to get out. So at one point we shut the gates permanently. We did come off the gates, and I was on the last Marine plane out of Kabul, right? Me, my boss, my MU commander, we were on the last Marine plane. Before we could leave, things like the day before we left, we were ordered to start cleaning up the base because the Taliban didn't think it was clean enough for them to take possession of.
Oh
So
my.
before we left Afghanistan, we literally got told on by the Taliban.
And so you had to clean up for the Taliban, the people that you'd been fighting against for all those years.
Yeah, they told on us that we were too dirty.
That's insane.
There was too much trash. There was too much on the base. So we spent the next day cleaning up because the Taliban said so.
That must have just felt like a huge slap in the face.
Yes, to put that mildly, right? You could put a bunch of different kind of terms to that, but yeah, go tell that to the young kids. You just fought your hearts out for 17 days. You haven't slept in 3 days, but before you can get some sleep, go clean up that trash.
Go clean for your
because the Taliban said so.
Insane.
Yeah.
Gosh, well, you may not want accountability, but when I hear all these kinds of things, it's just like, man, what is going on? Like, who made these decisions? You know, hopefully we get more answers and somebody will be held accountable. I know that that's not your motivation, but like you said, I mean, just so many of us Americans do feel betrayed by all of these things and hurting for you guys that, you know, put yourselves out there.
One thing you can never do to any infantryman or any infantry battalion, we're not victims. That didn't happen to us. We were proud to be a part of the operation. We were proud to be able to go into combat. All the infantry is that way, right? Notice I didn't say the Marine Corps, I said the infantry. So you can't say we're sorry that happened to you. Like, nope, we're proud to be here. This is what we choose to do. And this is the people that we choose to do it with, because these are the ones that we've spent the last 2 years with. These are the ones we're close with. These are our brothers. These are our sisters. This is what we were born to do, and this is what we're proud to do. So you can't really say that you're sorry that happened to us, right? It's an operation that we went into. These kids did amazing. They're, like I've said it multiple times, they did a great job in the face of horrific circumstances. So that's really what needs to be remembered about this operation, and not any of the political discourse.
Well, thank you for putting that out there, because I everything does get political, and I appreciate you making that delineation and really making it about the positive and making sure that we thank those that were there and that can say that they were honored to do it. We just can't thank you enough. So again, thank you, and thank you for coming on.
All right, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll leave it there. Talk to you soon.